I'm Vanessa. The air in the mediation center was thick with tension as I sat across from my family. My father, Victor, his face red with anger, pointed at me and shouted, "You've destroyed this family. How could you do this?" I looked around at my siblings, Ethan and Lily, and my mother, Amelia, their expressions a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. It was here, in this room, that the truth about my family's betrayal finally came to light. Let me rewind. For the past 12 years, I've worked as a disaster management coordinator for a large city hospital system. My job is to anticipate and prepare for any possible crisis, from natural disasters to cyber attacks. I've always been good at asking the right questions and planning for the worst, but I never thought to apply those skills to my own family. My family has a long-standing business, Victor Enterprises, which my father built from the ground up. It's a well-known event planning and management company in the area. My grandfather, Henry, was a shrewd and kind man. He owned a beautiful cottage on 30 acres by Lakewood, about 5 hours north of the city. He bought the land when it was relatively cheap, long before the area became a popular vacation destination. Grandpa spent years renovating the cottage himself. He added unique features like hand-carved wooden shutters, a hidden wine cellar under the stairs, and a cozy study where he kept a detailed journal of our family history. I was the only grandchild who took the time to visit him regularly in his last years. I helped him with odd jobs around the cottage, listened to his stories, and learned the value of standing up for what's right. When Grandpa passed away, his will left the cottage solely to me. The language was clear: the property was to be my personal asset, free from any claims by family members or the family business, unless I gave written permission. But my father didn't take the news well. He told everyone that Grandpa had made an emotional decision because I was the sensitive one. Ethan thought the inheritance was unfair, and Lily suggested I put the cottage in a family trust so no one would think I was being selfish. My mother, Amelia, cried and pleaded with me until I agreed to a compromise. I would keep the ownership, but the family could use the cottage for vacations. Later, when my father expanded Victor Enterprises, I allowed the company to hold a few corporate retreats at the cottage under a 1-year renewable license. The license had strict terms: no major structural changes, no subleasing, no representation that the company owned the property, and no borrowing against it. Either party could terminate the agreement with a 30-day notice. But my father ignored most of these restrictions. Company brochures started referring to the cottage as the company's private retreat. Ethan brought clients to the cottage without asking, and Lily used it as a backdrop for high-end property photos for her real estate business. My parents even replaced some of the furniture and acted as if they had turned the cottage into a shared family asset. Whenever I objected, they accused me of being too focused on the paperwork and not caring about the family. I let it slide because I was raised to believe that keeping the peace meant being obedient. Ethan was the confident and assertive one, always sure of himself. Lily was the charming one, with a gift for making people like her. I was the cautious one, always double-checking contracts and noticing when things didn't add up. My father would praise me for my attention to detail when it saved the company money, but he'd mock me when it got in the way of his plans. 3 weeks before my father's 65th birthday, a courier delivered an envelope to my apartment. It was a notice from Citibank regarding an appraisal of the Lakewood property. The bank believed that Victor Enterprises was seeking a $2.5 million revolving credit facility, partly secured by the cottage. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But then I saw the attached authorization form with my signature at the bottom. It wasn't my signature. I immediately pulled out the original license agreement and contacted the bank's fraud department. I asked for every document related to the loan application. 2 days later, what I received made my blood boil. The company had described the cottage as a family-controlled commercial retreat. My father had signed a declaration claiming he had the authority to pledge it. Ethan had submitted projected revenues from 5 years of corporate events at the property, and Lily had provided an inflated valuation based on a future luxury resort conversion. Someone had attached a photocopy of my driver's license, and my signature was forged again under a consent statement. The loan hadn't closed yet, but the bank had already extended temporary credit based on preliminary approval. My family had used part of it for deposits, marketing, and a contract for a major pharmaceutical conference scheduled for August. I called my lawyer, Max Thompson, whom I'd met while dealing with some legal issues at the hospital. He calmly looked through the documents and asked me, "Do you want to save the family relationship, save the property, or save yourself? You may not be able to do all three." Around the same time, I learned that a local environmental conservation group, Green Earth Alliance, had been trying to buy the neighboring land to protect a rare bird nesting area and prevent resort development. Their director had approached my family before, but Ethan dismissed the offer because he thought they could turn the cottage into a high-end resort after the company's expansion. The group still wanted the land and could close the deal quickly with private funding. Selling the cottage would end the fraudulent collateral claim, trigger the bank's internal review, and stop my family from exploiting it further. Max warned me that the sale would ruin the company's expansion plans and expose the forged documents. I didn't make a decision right away. I spent a night listening to Grandpa's old journal entries. In one of them, he wrote, "A gift loses its meaning when it costs the recipient her self-respect." The next morning, I called Max and said, "Accept the conservation offer, but I want everything legal and documented before anyone is informed." The conservation group moved much faster than my family expected. Since there was no mortgage on the cottage and Grandpa's estate had been settled years ago, the title was clean. The forged collateral papers had no legal standing because I hadn't authorized them. Max insisted that we notify the bank's legal department before finalizing the sale. He provided the deed, the will, the license agreement, handwriting samples, and a sworn statement confirming that I had never approved the loan application. The bank's reaction was swift. Their lawyers suspended the pending credit facility, froze the temporary line of credit, and started an investigation. They also placed restrictions on the company's event deposit account because some of the borrowed funds had passed through it. 5 days after my father's birthday party, the sale of the cottage was finalized. The buyer was the Green Earth Alliance. Under the agreement, the cottage would be used as a research and education center, and most of the shoreline would be permanently protected from commercial development. After fees and taxes, I received $1.6 million. I opened a new account at a different bank and immediately set up a trust for the long-term financial support of first responders affected by disasters. At 10:30 that morning, Max sent formal notices to my parents, Ethan, Lily, and Victor Enterprises. The letters terminated the company's license to use the cottage, demanded the preservation of all communications related to the forged forms, prohibited anyone from entering the property, and warned them not to contact the buyer. The bank also sent a letter informing the company that its accounts were under review. That's when the chaos started. My mother called me, but I let it ring. Ethan called twice, and Lily texted, "What have you done?" My father left a voicemail. At first, his voice was calm, saying there was a misunderstanding about the cottage and that I should call him before things got ugly. But 8 minutes later, his voice was full of anger. "You had no right to sell family property. Call me now." I opened our family group chat and typed, "The cottage was always mine, not family property. The sale is final. Direct any questions about the deed, business accounts, or forged documents to Max Thompson." Ethan replied, "Forged? Are you accusing Dad of a crime?" I responded, "I'm talking about documents submitted to the bank with my forged signature." Lily sent a long text, claiming the signature was a clerical error, saying the cottage was a family asset in spirit, and warning me that the sale would damage her reputation because she'd shown potential investors plans for a luxury resort on the land. I was shocked. I had no idea she'd been using my name to attract investors. Ethan called again. I answered and recorded the conversation after telling him. He said, "You have to reverse the sale." I told him it was impossible. He said, everything can be reversed. I replied, not this. He then said, you don't understand how many contracts depend on that property. I retorted, I understand perfectly. The bank sent me the projections. He went silent for a moment and then said, Dad told us you approved the financing. I said, I didn't. He continued, he said your signature was taken care of. I asked, who took care of it, Ethan? His breathing changed, and he ended the call. By noon, the company's crisis had spread. Vendors trying to process payments were notified that the operating account was restricted. The pharmaceutical company that had reserved the cottage for their conference learned that Victor Enterprises didn't own the property. Their legal department suspended the contract and demanded proof of all other venues in the company's portfolio. That evening, my father called from a different number. I answered because Max had advised me not to block anyone yet. He said, you planned this before my birthday. I said, yes. He continued, you came to my party pretending everything was okay. I said, I came with a gift. You told me I was invited out of pity. He said it was a joke, but I knew it was more than that. He accused me of selling Grandpa's legacy to punish him. I explained that I sold the property after discovering the forged signature. His words at the party just made me realize that private negotiation would only lead to more humiliation. The next morning, my building manager called to say that my parents, Ethan and Lily, were at the building, demanding access to my floor. I told the manager to send them to the resident conference room, where security cameras were installed. Max joined the meeting via video call. This infuriated my father. He said, this is a family matter, pointing at the screen. Max calmly replied, it became a legal matter when someone submitted your daughter's forged signature to the bank. My mother closed her eyes as if the word forged physically pained her. Lily placed a thick binder on the table, and Ethan stood with his hands on the back of a chair. My father started by saying that the cottage had always been treated as a shared family property. He claimed that Grandpa left it to me because I was single and needed security. He said the family had maintained and increased its value, so selling it without a vote was morally wrong. Max asked, which maintenance invoices were paid by the family? My father looked at my mother, who opened a folder and showed receipts for furniture, decor, and landscaping. I had already reviewed most of them. Almost all of the expenses were charged to Victor Enterprises and deducted as business expenses. I showed my records, which showed that I had paid property taxes, insurance, and major structural repairs over the past 12 years, totaling $200,000. Lily pushed the binder towards me. Inside were architectural renderings for a project called Lakewood Luxury Resort. It had 15 guest suites, a glass-enclosed event hall, a spa, and private boat docks. She said this project could change our lives and that investors were interested. I asked if she had told them I approved it. She hesitated and then said, Dad said approval was coming. I asked if she had used my name. She finally admitted that my name appeared as the landowner, but she claimed no one was deceived. Ethan took over and said the company had already spent nearly $450,000 preparing for the expansion. Some of the money came from reserves, some from the temporary bank credit, and some from client deposits. He said without the cottage, the August conference would fall through, and other clients might cancel. If the cancellations triggered refund clauses while the bank accounts were restricted, the company could go bankrupt. My father turned to me and said, you've put your brother's career, your sister's reputation, your mother's retirement, and 50 employees' jobs at risk just to prove a point. The accusation hit hard, as I'd spent my career protecting people during crises. But then Max asked Ethan to clarify the number of full-time employees. Ethan looked away, and my mother quietly said, 12. The rest are independent contractors. My father had inflated the number to pressure me. I asked how much of the $450,000 was actually spent on the cottage project. Ethan said, most of it. Max showed a spreadsheet from the bank's preliminary disclosures. only $100,000 was related to venue preparation and marketing. Over $120,000 had gone to pay overdue company taxes, $70,000 covered leases on luxury cars for Ethan and my father. Lily's agency had received $50,000 in consulting fees, and my mother had transferred $30,000 into a shareholder reimbursement account. It became clear that the cottage was being used to save a failing business. My mother started crying and said she didn't understand the loan documents and only moved the money because my father told her it was temporary. Ethan accused her of abandoning the family, and Lily accused Ethan of wasting money on client entertainment. My father slammed the table and said, "Sophie, tell the buyer you were under emotional stress. Return the money. We can fix this." I told him the deed was already recorded. He then said, "Buy the property back." I replied that it was now protected conservation land. Lily stared at me and asked if I'd placed an easement on it. I said the buyer did, and commercial development was permanently prohibited. My father then said, "Your grandfather would be disappointed." I opened my phone and played a recording from Grandpa's journal. His weak but clear voice filled the room. "If anyone tells Vanessa that protecting herself is a betrayal of the family, they prove why I left the property to her alone. The cottage is hers to do as she wishes." My mother covered her mouth, Lily stared at the table, and Ethan whispered something I couldn't hear. My father's face turned red with anger. He walked out without another word, followed by Ethan and Lily. My mother stayed for a few seconds and then asked, "Did you ever feel like we loved you?" I answered honestly, "Sometimes, but only when it was convenient for you." 2 days after the meeting, the bank denied Victor Enterprises' credit application and demanded repayment of the temporary advances within 30 days. They also referred the forged authorization to their fraud department. The company could only operate through a monitored account that restricted transfers to family members. My father immediately told relatives that I had maliciously reported the business and caused the bank to seize its money. He never mentioned the forged signature. He claimed I sold the cottage below market value because I was jealous of my siblings' success. Some relatives contacted me, and I sent them the same response. The property was mine under Grandpa's will, and I sold it after discovering the unauthorized attempt to use it as loan collateral. I refused to discuss confidential legal matters. One person, my father's younger sister, Grace, called and told me that Grandpa had suspected something like this might happen. As the executor of his estate, she remembered a sealed envelope stored with the original will. It was marked to be opened only if someone challenged my ownership. Max arranged to retrieve it. Inside were a handwritten letter, an old promissory note, and bank records from 18 years ago. They showed that my father had borrowed $200,000 from Grandpa to save Victor Enterprises after a failed business deal. The debt was later forgiven in exchange for my father signing an agreement that he would never claim any ownership interest in the cottage. Grandpa's letter also revealed that he originally planned to divide the property among all 3 grandchildren. But he changed his will after seeing my father and Ethan pressure me at 23 to guarantee a business loan with my inheritance. When I refused, my family excluded me from family gatherings for almost a year. Max forwarded the agreement to the bank, which destroyed my father's claim that he thought the cottage was family-controlled. It also raised questions about whether he had knowingly lied during the loan application. That afternoon, Ethan came to my workplace. Hospital security stopped him in the lobby, but I agreed to meet him in a public consultation room. He looked exhausted and kept checking his phone. 3 clients had canceled, and one demanded a $280,000 deposit back. Another client discovered that Victor Enterprises advertised properties it didn't own. Ethan said, "Dad wants to sue you for interfering with business relationships and selling property everyone relied on." I said, "Max would be interested in seeing that lawsuit." He rubbed his face. I told him a lawsuit would expose everything. He asked, "Everything meaning the forgery?" I asked who signed my name. After a long silence, he said, "Lily copied it." He explained that Dad told Lily they had my verbal approval and just needed the signature to keep the loan application going. Lily had access to my license from old insurance paperwork and traced my signature from a tax form. Ethan saw the document later but stayed silent because he thought the loan would save the company. I asked if he knew it was fake, and he said yes. I asked why he was telling me now. He said, "Lily is blaming me, Dad is blaming the bank, and Mom wants to leave the company. Someone has to stop this from becoming a criminal case." I told him the crime already happened when my signature was forged. He pleaded with me not to press charges. I said the decision might not be mine alone. That evening, Lily called without knowing Ethan had confessed. She first denied forging my signature, then called it a harmless shortcut, and finally blamed Dad for pressuring her. She cried and said she'd spent her life trying to be useful to him. I understood her fear, but I didn't excuse her actions. I told her she could have said no. She said I could have warned them. I replied that I'd been warning them for 12 years every time I said the cottage was mine. The final meeting was at a mediation center. My father's lawyer proposed a settlement. They wanted me to sign a statement saying the loan application was an internal misunderstanding. In return, they'd stop criticizing me and drop